What's next for you? Are you moving up to Queensland or Sydney, as the rumours say?
A short list of 3 countries we're looking at that are the most compared to Victoria right now that we're considering moving to. So number 1, I've got North Korea, 2, China, and 3, Venezuela. I thought they've got real good similarities right now to where Daniel Andrews run Victoria.
I'm really excited to bring Andrew Bogut to the RDA audience. Thank you so much for coming, Andrew. And look, a lot of people have been disappointed with, the music industry, Hollywood, and the sports industry as well. There's not that many standing up, but you are definitely one of them. How has that been for you to have a public figure and to stand against the narrative? How has that been?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Look, there's pros and cons to it. You obviously have a lot of people that are very supportive of it. Majority, to be quite honest with you, but there are the usual bedwetters that get on you. My whole thing is just, pro-choice. I think having people make their own decisions without having to lose their jobs or their livelihoods is what I'm really kind of pissed off about. I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. And yeah, but look, 90% of the messages I get, I get a lot of heartfelt emails and messages all over social media from people who not only are supporting what I say, but asking why there's not more people, at least just, you don't have to support a side, but just the whole pro-choice thing, I think is very, very important. And I've got a lot of friends and family for that matter that, didn't get the vaccine for health reasons. They got it because they were going to lose everything and couldn't put food on the table. So it's almost like that's acceptable these days, and that's the unfortunate reality of the situation we're in.
And do you think other, basketballers that and even other, I guess popular people in the sports industry, do you think that they actually are also pro-choice, but they're just not saying so?
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, look, I got a lot of messages, albeit not publicly, but on the quiet from athletes in AFL, NRL, NBL, that here in Australia that support kind of my stance. Look, I'm in a unique position because I'm recently retired, so I don't have to make the tough decision of the mandates and all that. So I can, it is a unique situation I'm in compared to most of people, but they all want to speak out, but they're not allowed to. Most of the sporting leagues in Australia were allowed to pretty much operate unaffected throughout the pandemic. So they could fly in and out of cities. They didn't have to do quarantine. And in return for that, they were all prepped by their sporting leagues, by the head honchos. They were basically told, the government's letting us kind of be special and letting us operate without any restrictions. You cannot say anything against lockdowns. You cannot say anything against government decisions. Don't make any comments on social media because we're lucky. We're allowed to operate. And that's kind of the coercion that's been put on professional athletes to, be able to operate.
Was that put in writing anywhere or just verbally?
I've had numerous discussions. It's factual and it's, just do the research. How many players in Australia, in Australian sporting leagues, you tell me there's not one that doesn't disagree with what's going on. But they've been pressured into not saying anything because their league will come down on them somehow, some way. And it's obvious. It's obvious as day. And we know the government's probably told the sporting leagues, hey, we're letting you operate. We're letting you function. We're letting you fly in and out of cities. Keep your mouth shut. And I don't blame those players. It's their livelihoods. Their livelihoods at stake as well, right? So they're trying to put start of someone's career, mid-career, maybe someone that hasn't managed themselves properly financially for their first 5 years and I'm going to play another 3 years and retire. There's a lot of different circumstances, so you can't blame the player. It all starts at the top with government and what they're doing, and then obviously they've just got their thumb on the forehead of so many organisations, not just sporting, all over Australia, that then pass the buck on down to the employees and the workers.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the power of coercion. There's no judgment at all. I don't know what it's like to be faced with food on the table or not. So no judgment at all. And do you know of any sports people that have taken the medical procedure who are maybe experiencing some fatigue and things like that? I've just heard that sometimes it's harder to keep up with the stamina.
Yeah, I mean, some have, but most of the athletes are in very good shape, so they recover pretty quickly. So I haven't heard of any crazy adverse reactions from athletes specifically. I've heard, a few of my friends that are pro athletes have had it and been knocked about for 3 or 4 days. Kind of, felt a little bit funny and not themselves, and then got on with it. But that's the athlete mentality; they're going to get on with it. But I do know, I know a fair bit of people that aren't athletes that are friends of mine, that are actual friends of mine. They aren't Facebook posts and they aren't Instagram posts that have had issues with it post. And yeah, it's just interesting hearing the way it's reported and jotted down. I know someone who had a heart reaction in their teenage years, and they basically said we can't really report this as adverse because the heart problem could be from anything, even though it was post the double dose. So look, there is issues. I'm just not sure why we can't speak about both sides of it. Like, if there's a pro side to it, obviously protecting you from ending up in hospital if you do happen to contract the virus, why can't we speak about that? Look, there are some risks that are valid and are starting to pop up more and more, especially with our youth. Especially with teenagers and young kids. But it's kind of taboo and conspiracy theory, and you're crazy to talk about that. But if we can't talk about both sides of it, that's kind of the disappointing thing, whether you agree or disagree with either side.
If you actually personally know people who have had, say, adverse reactions to the medical procedure, do you also know people who have struggled through COVID? Or
I haven't. My uncle in Croatia has had it. He, I wouldn't say he's in the best shape. He's had heart issues previously, and he's on, I think, after day 8 or 9, he was fine. He had a bit of a fever the first couple of days. A few athlete friends of mine in the NBA and whatnot have had it. I went through the NBA at numerous points last season and this season. The worst I'd heard was just, really bad flu for 2 days in bed, and then after that, pretty well recovered. So I haven't, thankfully, touch wood, I haven't heard anyone, I haven't heard or know anyone that's passed away. I don't know anyone personally who's ended up in ICU, but that's circumstantial as well. I don't have a lot of elderly friends and people that are in their 70s and 80s, which, obviously COVID affects more than people in good health or at a young age, so that's kind of always been my gripe as to why, we're locking down locking down healthy people essentially to protect people that are affected, where it should be kind of the flip side. The people that are possibly affected or have health issues or are elderly probably need to protect themselves more than, a 40-year-old that's in great shape.
Yeah, and then they can keep the economy going for the elderly and vulnerable. So that should have been done from the start. I agree. The reason I asked that question is because a lot of people I'm interviewing, they know quite a few people who have had adverse reactions, whether it's minor or major. But in contrary, they don't know many people who have had terrible COVID symptoms. So I just find it interesting. So I wanted to make that point. And look, you're from Melbourne, Victoria, and I know you're not static at the moment, but how have you been reacting to what's been going on in Melbourne? In the last week specifically, there's overnight protests at Parliament. There's this bill. It's kind of like watching a movie or something like that. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's been hard to watch. I mean, the last week has been good just to see people push back, but just to see the media then label these people as neo-Nazis and right-wing agitators. Look, every protest you have the last 100 years, there's 1% that do stupid things and say stupid things, but to label the other 99% with the same brush when these are the parties in politics, whether Liberal or Labor, that push, protect minorities and don't stereotype, and then all of a sudden now you're stereotyping a whole group of, reportedly 50, 60, 70,000, 100,000 people. All of them are based on, one person who had a noose, at the protest, so it's very reminiscent of what was going on in the US with just labeling any protesters that aren't suiting the narrative as right-wing neo-Nazis, which I think is just silly. Like I said, were there a few people there that were causing problems? Of course, but that you go to anything, you go to a sporting event with 50,000 people, there's going to be 1% that are idiots. It's human. It's life. It's human nature. But look, I'm proud of Victorians for standing up, but it's just been a hell of two years, and I've got friends that still to this day are kind of not happy with their decision of having to get the vaccination because it wasn't their choice, and they're still pissed at the government for it. A few of them had issues post it, and they know now that they're basically part of a subscription service where if the booster comes in 3 months where they have to get it to maintain their job, and that they're probably going to have to do it. And the discussions I've had with people, that's just not right. It's just unacceptable. And then you look at what Victoria is trying to do. And I think New South Wales with now teenagers, and then they're eventually going to try to go, below 12 years old, 5 to 12. I mean, it's just insane when you look at those numbers that those, 5 to 12-year-olds just are not affected by COVID at all. Like the numbers show it, unless you've got some health issues. So to be going through all that, it's just been really hard to watch, and it's been really hard to watch the level of corruption in Victoria. Even outside of COVID, like I did a big thing on the I Cook Foods debacle on my podcast. I've had them on 3 times, and it's just insane what they've gotten away with, and they have, credit to Daniel Andrews to an extent, because he's clocked politics to an extent. He has cronies in every department. He has people in his pocket in every department, from police force to fireys to ambulance, to the hospital system, just absolutely everywhere. And, the fact that he survived a lot of what's going on with the levels of corruption is it's absolutely mind blowing. And it's just disappointing. You look at, what the police have somewhat become in Victoria. And I know some police officers that are very good people, but they're stuck in a hard place. They've even said to me, I have no other skills. I can't go do anything else. So I kind of have to be Dan's whipping boy to an extent. So you can't even completely blame them. But then once you lose distrust from the police and the public lose that trust, then it's very hard to get that back. And that's what we're seeing in Victoria now. And it starts at the top. It starts with Dan Andrews and his cronies. And hopefully people, are starting to see how bad it really is.
Well, I think this pandemic bill, I said from the start, I thought it would be the undoing of Daniel Andrews, because he put everything on paper. And, today is Thursday morning. To everyone who doesn't know, this is a pre-recorded interview, but Thursday morning, today's the vote in Parliament. So, it could be the undoing of him. And then December 15th, in theory, we're not going to have any state of emergency. So it's just going to go back to normal. Can you imagine that actually happening?
No, I don't. I'd love to be optimistic, but we've been let down month on month since March of last year, where there's a light at the end of the tunnel and then it goes dark again. And I think there'll be something that happens. There'll be something slithery, some snake-like amendment, or something's going to happen. I'm just not optimistic, and we've just seen it so many times before. With borders opening, closing, borders. If we get to 70%, we can start to ease. If we get to 80%, well, shit, we're at it. What's Australia at now? The numbers they report are at 80+%. We're still not open. We've got states that are separate countries. WA, Queensland, they're basically a whole separate country. Yeah. Like if we're gonna do that, we might as well just actually implement proper passports to travel state to state, because that's the way we're going. And it's just to show your papers to go into a cafe or a restaurant is one thing. People supporting that is the other thing. It's just absolutely mind blowing that people are supporting this. And like I said, I have no gripes on the choice people make and where they stand, but you should have the freedom of choice. And it's just there's a lot of problems with what I've seen in the last 2 years, specifically in Victoria, who have had the harshest lockdowns. Neighbours telling on neighbours, and you got the public thinking they're police. Someone might have an exemption not to wear a mask, and they're getting abused. It's just humanity's just been sucked out of Victoria this last 2 years, and that's not going to be an easy thing to fix, COVID or no COVID.
Yeah, it's been shocking, and there are times when I think maybe Australia or Victoria, maybe they don't mind being controlled, maybe they don't want to be saved, so to speak. So I guess we'll have to find out at the next election, which is a bit too long to wait. But do you have hope for Victoria getting out of this corrupt mess we're in? I guess you don't.
Look, somewhat I do, but it's just, the politicians just continue to surprise me with what they're putting out that's not pushed back on. And I mean, my grandparents migrated from a communist system, and my grandmother said communism was bad. And people might be shocked by this, but she never saw anything to the extent of what's going on here. And that's coming from my grandmother. Like she said, look, it was bad as far as like my family were on the wrong side of politics. So my great grandfather got thrown in jail numerous times, was beaten by the communist police in front of his house, in front of his neighbors, whatever, right? So she said it wasn't all bad, but then once, if you weren't on that team, then it was horrendous for you. And that's what she's seeing here. She's, equating it to like, well, if you're not Team Dan Andrews, like you're in some trouble. And people, that she talks to about it are like, you're just a crazy old lady. But she's spot on to an extent. It's actually, there's no political prisoners and all that kind of stuff yet. Hopefully there isn't. But that's what she's kind of seeing. And she's just, she lived both lives, and she's seeing a lot of parallels between what my family went through, what 3, 4, 5, 6 decades ago to what we're seeing now.
In Nazi Germany, they referred to Jews as disease spreaders, and also I just saw an article yesterday in New Zealand with a protest picture with like kids and families, like with banners, like New Zealand flags and stuff. And they said danger of terrorism growing in New Zealand. And I'm just like, what? So, what you were talking about, the protesters being called certain things, and they're definitely setting up this narrative to actually make the protesters look like extreme terrorists that need to be dealt with in a terrorist way. And if they're able to use that label, they can come down with a really heavy hand. So it's pretty scary. Yeah,
and our politicians are doing it too. Like I found real interesting that in the last 2 years, what's his name, Jerome Weimar and Brett Sutton have not walked out of Parliament House once. I don't believe, I could be wrong. They have not walked out. I've never seen footage of them walking down the front of Parliament House, down the steps. Well, it happened to know protesters there one day, and they walked down. Mainstream media cameras already in tow to film them getting abused. And I'm like, why would you walk out in front of the protesters if we all know there's parking underground there. There's secure ways for these politicians to get out. It's blatant what that was. It was a PR exercise and now you've got, the independents going on camera saying we're threatened, we feel this, we feel that. Well, yeah, there's some people that have had choice words for you, but come on, like you're not going to play the victim in my book right now. You don't condone anyone with, alluding to death threats and whatnot, but it was clear as day what was done, and it's manipulating people that are just on the fence with all this to say, the next thing is they're the reason why we're going to lockdown, or they're the reason why we can't open up. And it's like, well, no, the politicians are, because they've moved the goalposts 750 times since the pandemic started. But yeah, I found it really hilarious that they just walked down the steps to get abused on camera. And then now the narrative's been set for the last 2 weeks with the mainstream media in tow about, they're going to, there's extremists, we need this. So they're going to try to chuck in a bunch of extra laws now. Mm-hmm. There'll be protest laws, you can see what's going to happen. I can see it. And it's clear as day. So it will be interesting to see if protests are even allowed in 3 or 4 months' time in Australia.
Great. Here we go again. The police that are there at the protest, the 24-hour protest now, there's kids like writing chalk on the ground, playing card games, like grandparents there. Enough police are changing in and out, and they would know that the narrative's a lie. So hopefully that, gets rippled through society, the truth. But, the mainstream have obviously a big hold. And
well, I can tell you just quickly, I can tell you. So with the Melbourne protests, I've got some friends that went that are the most non-political people you would ever meet. Like they're just everyday workers that they block out politics for the most part. Like these are the people that generally go to a voting booth and draw a picture on the card just so they don't get fined. Like they could not give a shit, right? Yeah. And they're not pro-vax, they're not anti-vax. And these people are all going. Some of them, in fact, have had their vaccination and have actually gone to the protest. So it's a small sample size, and that's all. That's what I look at. I talk to everyday people that are friends of mine that work, 7 till 7, whether they're on the tools, whether they're in admin, whatever, and they're actually going to these protests. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty interesting, because what you read in the mainstream is they're extremists and blah blah blah. And I'm like, shit, I must not know my friend very well then if that's the case, because they're a family, they've got 2 kids, all they want to do is work hard, spend their weekends, maybe go and have a nice meal or going away for the night and spending it with their children or their sport. They're the furthest thing from right-wing extremists. So that's just a small note that I made as well.
Well, yeah, I think the actual bill has really brought together left and right, religious, non-religious, black, white, because, you've had First Nations people doing speeches. You've had, it's just, I actually think it's been really unifying, which is awesome. Did you know that there was around about 130,000 people at that protest on Saturday?
Yeah, I saw some of the footage where they equated the was it the Vietnam War protests in Melbourne that were quoted as 100,000 back in the whatever that was, 40, 50 years ago now. They equated that to the same photo, right? And it looked very similar. So look, the mainstream media was 10 odd thousand, and we know you're going to probably put on 3 or 4x whatever they quote. So yeah, it was awesome turnout, I think, and it was I didn't see any violence there, and it all comes down to how the police handle it too. With the initial protests, I just never understood why the police would go that hardcore on people when you can just basically cordon off all the cross streets, let them march down, let them have their say, and they're going to go home. But as soon as there's a bit of argy-bargy back and forth, and then it just causes conflict. And I never understood why they went so gung-ho on them in the first place. But it's just the time we're in.
I tried to negotiate with like a police liaison high up, and she said, but we're in lockdown. And I said, yeah, but human rights. And she's like, no, lockdown. I'm like, okay, so there's nowhere to go. So basically, we would be walking down Flinders Street and there'd just be a 4 police barricade thick, stopping people from walking. Like, why would you do that? You just let them walk. There's 10,000 of them, It's crazy. Yeah, you're right. But you know what? Word on the street is like when I'm out there mingling is that there is a way to repair the relationship between the police and the people. It's not too late. So hopefully something big happens soon and they stand with us or something.
Yeah, no, look, like I said, a good friend of mine is a police officer. And like I said, he's not a fan of Dan at all, but they can't say anything. And he's stuck in, he's almost at retirement. So he's like, shit, if I say something, I'll lose my pension. I get fired. Who knows what happens? So they're stuck in a hard place too. And he's notorious for like when they had all these COVID laws in and kids not on playgrounds. He's like, we drive past. I don't stop. I see kids on the playground. I'm not dragging little Jimmy off a swing because of COVID. So he just generally does the bare minimum with all that stuff and doesn't do it at all. And that's how most the police, at least out in the suburbs, the city's a little bit different, I've noticed, because the city's much more people, it's much more dense. Whereas out in the suburbs, I mean, those cops, they're trying their best and they don't want to have, that bad relationship with their local community because they're going to see a lot of those people on a daily basis. So they've tried their best for the most part. Mm-hmm. And another comment that was made was, there's flurries, there's people that come through the academy that are power hungry and power tripping, and they're the ones they're trying to push to do all the COVID stuff. Whereas there's batches that come through that actually join the police force for the right reasons. So like anything, like the protesters, like whatever you look at with crowds, there's going to be a few that ruin it for the majority, but you can't judge a majority based on, some people's poor actions.
I agree. And once this is all over, hopefully we can weed those ones out and, reboost the police force and, do a lot of work with them. So hopefully. Now, before I wrap things up, is there sort of a general message that you would have for Australians or anyone watching?
Yeah, I guess my message is just around just stop letting the mainstream media and politicians divide us. Whether you're pro-lockdown or anti-lockdown, or whether you're pro-vax or anti-vax, I think we're all human beings at the end of the day, and that's what's been lost with all this. It's like we're starting to label people based on their thoughts and views around COVID, and that's a scary thing. We could see the remnants. So you could see it starting last year, and now it's gone. And it goes both ways, to be honest with you. Like you've got people that are pro-vax calling people that aren't vax dirty, and then you've got people that are really on the other wing of complete anti-vax that are saying, you're going to die in a year. So I don't think either of those wings help the cause. I think you got to respect people's decisions for whatever they make them for, but it's just about stop the division. Like it's, I just don't understand. We've got to a point where people who are vaccinated are afraid of the unvaccinated and vice versa at times. That's what's disappointing. And you're seeing families break up because of it. You're seeing, I've heard stories about whether a grandparents decided not to get the vaccination, they can't see their grandkids, or vice versa. And I know some people that their parents won't see them because they're not, and it's just like, it's literally dividing communities and families and schools and churches and sporting teams and everything. And it shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't allow politicians that kind of power, but you just don't see where it's going to end, like showing your papers, how long we have to show our papers for to get into a restaurant. How many boosters are we going to need? People say, well, as many as it takes. Well, it's a tough sell right now for the government to be pushing boosters on people that have had 2 vaccinations. On top of that, they need to sell the people that aren't vaccinated to get the 2. So, we saw in the NBA, I know you don't follow basketball, but they had the Johnson & Johnson vaccinations were actually, the NBA put a memo out saying that if you don't get a booster shot within 2 months of getting the Johnson & Johnson, you'll be deemed unvaccinated. Whoa. So the NBA has basically said that Johnson & Johnson vaccination you've taken, that double vax, is utterly useless and doesn't work. That's essentially the writing on the wall that I'm reading. 2 months, like they say, these things are, you're supposed to get 5 or 6 months life out of these things. So that's starting to put people offside. But now they've said, booster, and that's a sporting league. So, once our government starts pushing that, it's going to be interesting times to see. But I'm of the mind that most people will get it. Most people that have had their double will get as many boosters as it takes, because it's going to be that, that message of, it's just one more to maintain your freedom. It's just one more to maintain your freedom. And if you've done 2, you'll do 3, you'll do 4. But that won't stop until people push back. And I think, like I said, I'm not pro or anti it, but I think everyone should be able to make their own decision.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it could go both ways. I mean, people who didn't want to get it, when they get told to get the booster, hopefully they're like, you know what, I'm drawing the line, that could happen. So hopefully, but yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for coming on, Andrew. And we'll be watching your social medias closely, because we always do. We love what you're doing. Thank you for speaking out. And if you can convince any of your other mates to do it, tell them that we will support them as much as we possibly can.
We'll try my best. Thanks.